Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Thank you for that warm intro. In full disclosure, a couple of things. First off, I want to thank Dr. Lynn Hubert, whose idea this actually was. Since coming to Holy Cross about 6-7 months ago, Lynn and I have spent lots of time on the road together, visiting with alumni and benefactors and friends of the college. And so you have lots of conversations. I have lots of conversations about our history, about education, about educational leadership and theory. And she said two things. I think you need to write a book, and I think you need to teach a class. So thank you, Dr. Hubert, for urging this to take place. And I think that the other disclaimer that I'll give you, one of you was so kind enough to post on social media how excited you were about this class and the world-class educators that you have here at Holy Cross. I am not among those world-class educators, but the women and men that you have in these classrooms every day, they are among those world-class educators. I humbly say to you that in my career in education, having begun my education first working with students in a juvenile detention center, later as a school counselor, as an English teacher, social studies, theology, really whatever was needed, working in a poor Catholic school, later becoming a school principal and a school president, later helping to found a doctoral program at St. Edward's University in educational leadership, and then developing a course within that program as well, which I taught, which was titled Leading in Times of Complexity and Chaos. Well, maybe that'll be another lesson for another day on what that might look like. So it really is my great honor. But among the things that happened along the way for me, I had the really great privilege, I think most of you know, that I have worked with the Holy Cross Priests and Brothers now for almost my entire career, a little more than 30 years. And as I went through my own doctoral studies and began to learn about leadership theory, I could stand here today and talk with you and teach you more about what it means to be a level 5 leader or a virtuous leader or a servant leader or, from the example of Mother Teresa, a merciful leader or an adaptive leader or a contextual leader. But I began to ask myself the question, is there a Holy Cross leadership theory? And so the impetus of this class comes from that research that myself and a team of researchers from my time at St. Edward's University conducted. And we're going to build upon this throughout the entire semester. And within that, each one of these classes, we have invited in a guest speaker who's been in leadership to share with us her or his tips and wisdom. And in a moment, I'll, of course, introduce you to our speaker for today. But a little bit of housekeeping first. If you are, thank you. If you are registered and enrolled in this class, right, you're going to get a grade, either a pass or a fail. So make sure that you have signed in. I think there was a sign-in sheet somewhere back there, so make sure that you've signed in. And then I'm going to ask after each of these 8 sessions for you to submit to me a 1-page, you can go to 3 pages if you'd like, reflection on what it is you took away from this session, okay? Second bit of housekeeping, if you're not registered enrolled, and you'd like to be, I think you still can, but we would ask you to come to all 8 sessions in order to get that 1 credit and earn that pass or fail. If you're a guest, and we know we have many guests, we have guests here from our faculty and staff here at the college, so thank you for honoring me by being here. We have guests that have come from Holy Cross Village. We have guests that have come from across the Tri-Campus. We have guests from here in the city of South Bend, and we have guests who have come from all over the country for football weekend to be here. So we welcome you, and I thank you. As we get into this theory of Holy Cross leadership, I want to just give you a brief intro into things. I think it's important that first we understand a little more about Christian leadership. And so as we look here on the screen, this is a picture of the founding brothers who founded Holy Cross College, 1966. But our history goes back much further than that. It goes back to the early 1800s in France. Christian leadership and Christian education, however, go back to Christ himself. And so when you look and you see this mission statement of our college, I want you to pay particular attention to the where it says the competence to see and the courage to act. Because in our research that we did, we discovered that among those traits and characteristics, competencies, if you will, dispositions of a Holy Cross leader, at the core of it was that they possessed the competence to see and the courage to act. I think as we understand Christian leadership, one of the examples that I learned myself of what it means the central task of a Christian leader to be is borrowed from an image from an archbishop, a German archbishop, that says that as a Christian leader, we're called to be a finger pointing to the moon. And he goes on to say that in the darkness of the night, leaders, we direct our gaze to the light that illuminates the sky and breaks the monopoly of darkness on the earth. This is the task of a Christian leader, to point always to God. Radically detached from self-interest and personal gain, Christian leaders make their lives a signpost to something greater than themselves. They take their cue from Christ himself, who without reservation gave his life wholeheartedly to God, pointing always to the moon. And so in Matthew 20, 25 through 27, we learn about the meaning of servant leadership. When Jesus summoned his disciples and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the great ones make their authority over them felt. But it shall not be so among you. It shall not be so among us. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just so the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So understanding that the core of Christian leadership is that example of Christ himself. Blessed Basil Moreau, the founder of the congregation, said that as leaders, we're called upon to immerse ourselves in the heart of Jesus in order to draw his thoughts and feelings to ourselves, in order to put on his virtues, as if one soaks a piece of cloth in dye so as to give it a color. So how then did Christ lead? He does not fit neatly into the modern categories of leadership theory. For his personal understanding and modeling of leadership both upholds standards while simultaneously inverting and subverting others. He was, for example, a man of great charisma, wisdom, conviction, and passion. His personality was magnetic and arresting. His speech was eloquent and authoritative, and his deeds mighty and awe-inspiring. He attracted massive crowds through the power of preaching, teaching, and healing, and he gained profound social influence through his characteristic. And so Christ's understanding of servanthood necessitated a deep understanding of relationships, both a divine set of relationships and human set of relationships. For in order to truly serve God and human beings, we must have a thorough understanding of the needs and the wants and the expectations of others. That's the competence to see. Christ always listened carefully and watched attentively in order to discern the needs of particular time and place. And then, equipped with this knowledge, he moved into action. So in this sense, Christ was a man of great vision and resolve, perceiving the needs of others and acting swiftly to meet them. Though lacking in material resources, he was the preeminent steward of his time, energy, and gifts, employing himself and his talents creatively to concretize the kingdom that he preached and reveal the Father, who he knew so intimately. His deep sense of responsibility for the well-being of others prompted him to become a friend of all. His ministry was one of accompaniment, defined by a loving and patient companionship that sought not only to help others, but to help make them whole and enable them to become men and women that God created them to be. Christ was truly an exemplar of godly leadership, challenging and redefining traditional understandings of how a leader was to think and to act. In all that he did, he was a finger pointing towards the moon. Now, in our study, we looked at some of the famous figures in the history of the congregation, again, dating back to the early 1800s. But among those foremost characters that Holy Cross pointed towards were the mother and father of Jesus, St. Joseph and our Blessed Virgin Mary, the patronesses, the patron and patroness for the Congregation of Holy Cross. And then we studied the founders of the Congregation of Holy Cross, Father Jacques de Jarier, who founded the Brothers of St. Joseph, which predated the congregation by about 20 years. He was a courageous priest that preached in the underground of France during the time of the French Revolution, when if you were found to be teaching or preaching or living a life of faith, then you were executed. He taught and he preached and he brought the sacraments and encounters with Christ in the underground. And then he passed the baton on to a bright, charismatic, entrepreneurial, bold, courageous leader in Blessed Basil Moreau, who brought together the men that make up today the Congregation of Holy Cross, priests and brothers. And as you can see here on the screen, this is actually an image taken from when they signed the declaration, passing that baton to the creation of the Congregation of Holy Cross as we know it today. And Dujarier says to Moreau, I ask you to do everything you can to expand the work of Holy Cross, to spread it by every means that heaven puts within your reach. And within 5 years of that date, among the missions that they went on internationally was to come right here to Northern Indiana with the founding of the University of Notre Dame. Other famous figures in our history that we studied include the young man on the left-hand side, Brother Andre Motai. Brother Andre was the first principal. He was the teacher of teachers. He was the one who taught all Holy Cross educators how we do what we do. That legacy lives on today. Highly relational, Socratic methodology, seminar style, service and justice oriented, with a Catholic worldview. On the right-hand side, you see the first woman of Holy Cross, who Moreau recruited himself to lead the branch of women that now has led to 3 branches of women all over the world. The Sisters of the Holy Cross, who we know at St. Mary's next door. The Sisters of the Holy Cross, who are mostly identified today in Canada. And the Marianite Sisters of Holy Cross that operate the University of Holy Cross in New Orleans, and as well schools and ministries and hospitals all over the world. She was a young woman who as well was bold and courageous and intelligent. She didn't see a group of women joining a religious order to serve as servants to the men, as was often occurring in religious life, but rather to help empower women in positions of leadership. That's Leo Katie Gascon, who took the name of Mother Mary of the Seven Sorrows, Seven Dolours. And then let's get a little bit closer to home. Other figures that we studied. Father Edward Sorin, who is credited with founding the University of Notre Dame. And of course, that fateful day when he stood and overlooked St. Joseph and Mary Lakes and said that he envisioned that one of the greatest forces, this university would become one of the greatest forces for good in the world. And indeed, that vision has been realized now since 1842. And then there's Sister Madaleva Wolf. You can drive right down the avenue, enter onto the campus at St. Mary's, and you will cross Madaleva Wolf Boulevard. She was the longest serving president in the history of St. Mary's. Many women in Catholic ministry today can credit and trace their roots to Madaleva Wolf's bold and courageous leadership to form a Master's in Divinity program for women long before women were involved in religious life and before others would allow them to be able to study at their universities. So yes, they could go into life as a religious sister, but what if you were a laywoman and wanted to go into ministry? There weren't those avenues for you. We studied as well Saint Brother Andre, known as God's doorkeeper, the founder of the St. Joseph Oratory in Montreal, Quebec. A man who came from seemingly nothing. He had a speech impediment. He was what we would know today as he had a pretty severe learning disability, so he was unable to learn at the same level. He had physical issues his entire life and health issues his entire life, and yet he wanted to join a religious order that was known as a teaching order, to be an educator. They made him a doorkeeper at the school in Montreal, Quebec, where he stood for 40 years and greeted families as they arrived every day, performing numerous miracles because of his piety and a life of prayer that he was committed to. Hopefully in your lifetime you'll get a chance to visit the St. Joseph Oratory in Montreal, Quebec. There's people like Brother Ephraim O'Dwyer that we studied. Brother Ephraim was responsible in the United States for taking the U.S. center of what we had here in the U.S. and spread it now internationally again. So a religious order that started in France, that went into Algiers, or Northern Africa. It went to Bengal, what we know today as modern-day Bangladesh. It came here to the United States. Now the United States had grown so fast that it then began to do missions internationally again in places like India and expanding in Bangladesh. Brother Ephraim O'Dwyer built and formed dozens of Holy Cross schools in the United States through a unique business model that some might call a pyramid scheme, but he did do through a unique business model to help build school after school after school. Then there's Father Ted Hesburgh, who our speaker in a moment was the successor of, 36 years as president at the University of Notre Dame. During a time of tumult in our country and in our world, in our church and in society. And one of the things that Father Hesburgh said is that if our lives and education have any meaning or significance at all, it will be in our reading the signs of the times and in educating the young of our times in the visions and the values that will civilize and make for reasonable human progress and lasting peace on earth. And there's the Venerable Patrick Peyton. You've heard the phrase before, the family that prays together stays together. That's a Holy Cross priest that did that. He was known as an evangelist priest, a tele-evangelist priest at the beginning of radio and TV, and helped to spread the gospel message centered primarily around the prayer of the rosary all over the world. And so it was those figures that I just pointed to you that we studied, that we researched, and we identified 7 attributes of a Holy Cross leader. For those of you that are in my class, by the way, I'll upload this to Moodle, so you've got this whole presentation. And what were those characteristics? Zeal, right? Zeal, as Father Moreau says, is that great desire to make God known, loved, and served. Passion, energy, infectiousness. But note what Basil Moreau said, it's to make God known, loved, and served. Piety, that's a faithfulness, that's a dedication to, that's a love for Christ in building our relationship with Him. Humility, so servant leadership. Each of these leaders possessed those characteristics. I think we'll hear more from Father Edward Monk Malloy in a few minutes about humble servant leadership. They possessed the competence to see. They recognized the needs of the signs of the times, and then they had the courage to act on it. These are hallmarks of what it means to be a Holy Cross leader. Part of what I hope you'll gain from this class over the 8 sessions that we'll be together is to understand that our unique brand of leadership calls us to have the competence to see and the courage to act. It also calls for a phrase that we created, that we coined, called entrepreneurial magnanimity. All right, so what does that mean? So magnanimity is a virtue. It's a virtue of boldness, of pursuing greatness. But it's not pursuing greatness for your own accolades. It's pursuing greatness for a cause much bigger than ourselves. The magnanimous person is one who is bold, who reaches, who strives for greatness. And sometimes it takes a little creativity to do so, like Father Sorin did, like Ephraim O'Dwyer did, like Leo Katie Gascon did, the entrepreneurial mindset. and then we accompany. We walk side by side with all people. So these 7 attributes are going to be attributes that we'll study throughout our 8 sessions together. Each of our speakers that we have coming up in the coming weeks, we have a Fortune 100 president and CEO. We have a venture capitalist in industry and technology who serves on 3 Vatican commissions for Laudato Si, for Papa Francesco's Economic Council, and now the newest commission that has been formed on artificial intelligence and human flourishing. Kyle Bellarta will be one of our speakers in the next few weeks. We have somebody who teaches entrepreneurship here in the city. We have someone who runs the largest nonprofit Catholic foundation in the state of Michigan. That will be one of our speakers. And then as we continue to move through our course, our last speaker will be speaking specifically on how you as leaders should place an importance on self-care, on how do you continue to motivate the motivator, right? How do you take care of the caregiver? And now to today's speaker. So, Monk, thank you for joining us today. Monk has been traveling the world with his book, doing book signings and book reviews, and it's extraordinary that he is here, lives across the street, makes himself available, has invited me to meet on 2 occasions with him. I am blessed that I am the recipient of the quarterly journal that Monk writes, right? You talk about valuable tidbits on life and leadership. There's book reviews here, there's movie reviews here, there's speeches that he's given, there's speeches that he's listened to and critiqued. Extraordinary. Now I have to tell you a little close to home. Growing up in Washington, D.C., when I was playing basketball on the playgrounds in Washington, D.C., there's a little neighborhood outside of Catholic University called Brookland. And in Brookland, there's a set of athletic courts and fields called Turkey Thicket. And so if you were an athlete and you wanted to play with the best of the best, right, hone your game, you would go to Turkey Thicket and play pickup basketball there. Well, the legend of Turkey Thicket was Edward Monk Malloy. And while I might have come around many, many years later, his legend continued to live on. He grew up in that neighborhood, attended Catholic schools, played high school basketball, was on a high school basketball team that won every one of its games in its junior and senior year, was declared a national champion, made his way here to the University of Notre Dame. I'm going to ask you about how you made yourself here to Notre Dame. And then through his studies as a theologian, a moral theologian, eventually was named as the president at the University of Notre Dame, where he served for 18 years. We're fortunate that he continues to teach over at the University of Notre Dame and continues to serve as a mentor and a role model for all of us. So, Monk, we welcome you. Let's make sure we get your microphone on. Okay, so Monk, welcome. Please give Monk Malloy a big round of applause, everybody. Thank you. Okay, so Monk's book, most recent book, and he's written several, is called People First, Reflections on Leadership. And when Monk first shared this book with me, and he gave me this caveat, he said, I've written this book the same way I like to teach my classes and to give my talks, my presentations, in a Q&A format, right? So it's very readable, very engaging as a reader, and certainly possesses a deep level of depth to it. So Monk, I'm going to start off with a couple of questions, and of course the audience is going to ask, I'm sure, many more. But first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, how you came to Notre Dame, and then a little bit about your career as the president of the University of Notre Dame?
I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. My parents were both high school educated. No one in my family had ever gone to college. And my father and mother were very interested in promoting education for myself, my 2 younger sisters. We always prized having books around and newspapers. We did the family crossword puzzles every week. And I was always very athletic. And so I enjoyed being on the playground. I claim that in basketball, I never committed a foul. I was always fouled upon, but never fouling. But I played football, basketball, baseball, softball, primarily those were kind of typical of the time. And this playground was a great meeting place for people from different socioeconomic areas. And then after the Brown versus Board of Education decision and the beginning of integration to replace the segregation that had prevailed before that, even in the capital city, I can remember a basketball star named Elgin Baylor came over with an entourage, and we would take the turkey thicket. There was 3 levels of full court. One level would be pro, next level would be college, the next level would be high school. So that was a great modeling for what we could aspire to try and be. I always loved school. When I went to Carroll, it was the first grade integrated school in the history of Washington, long before the Brown versus Board of Education decision. We were about 20% black. Our basketball team, when I was a senior, was 3 black starters and 2 white starters. We had subs from both races. We would go to all white schools, and they would say, why are you playing with those guys? One time, somebody from an all-white high school came in and said, we want you to use the showers first because we're going to clean them after you get out. We're going to fumigate them. We'd go to an all-black high school, and they would say, why are you playing with those white guys? To my black teammates. And so the civil rights movement became an integral part of my upbringing. I was there for the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream talk. I was also in Washington when the riots happened after his assassination. I was in a car on 14th Street where a gigantic brick came and busted the window right in my face, but the safety glass saved me. All the windows were busted out. The city was up for grabs. I also was invited by Mrs. King to speak on the King birthday at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, along with a governor of Arkansas named Clinton. There were 4 or 5 of us. So there was a lot of that. D.C. is a place that people go to make their case for whatever the cause might be. I really love the city. I'm a big city guy by nature. And then I got recruited. I narrowed my choices down to Villanova, Santa Clara, and Notre Dame. I came out here. The people that hosted me, I just thought they were wonderful examples. I instantaneously decided Notre Dame was the place for me. And I came here. Unfortunately, as a scholarship athlete, my education was paid for. During my junior year, I heard a conversation down the hall about a social service project in Mexico, and I pursued it. It turned out there was 1 in Peru and 2 in Mexico. And while I was there in Aguascalientes, we went out to where the statue of Christ the King is. And while I was there, I had a mountaintop experience. I didn't hear voices or see a vision, but it was a sense of certitude that I was being called to become a priest. I was 54 years, well, I've been priest 54 years. That was long before that. Anyway, my senior year, I was advised by one of the priests that was in Mexico with us. I was accepted by Holy Cross, and I had a wonderful formation. I was at the time of Vatican II, which I'm a big advocate for. And as a result of that, I was able to be involved in a lot of church stuff that I felt was important at the time. And when I finished my formation, I went off and I did a master's degree while I was in formation in both English and theology. And then I went to Vanderbilt for my PhD in theology. I was the first Catholic priest in the Divinity School program there. It introduced me to the world of Protestantism. I became good friends with a lot of Protestant ministers. I was the first time living in the South. It was kind of the Mid-South. I learned a lot from that. It's the center of country music. So we used to take visitors to Ryman Auditorium and watch country music performed. One of the things I found about country music, if you make one great song, you can last forever. Because they keep saying, sing that song again, will you? And it was a good thing. So anyway, I've loved being a teacher. I found that when I was invited to be an administrator, that it was all kind of something that I could really get engaged in. It was a privilege and an opportunity. I had been a school president, senior class president. In high school, I've been all president at Notre Dame. I'd always had some experiences of leadership. And then when I was a student at Notre Dame, there was a thing called the Blue Circle Honor Society, which was self-perpetuating. And they tried to bring together the leaders from every aspect of life at Notre Dame. And so my experience of that was also helpful. And then I got invited to be a seminary director, undergraduate theology director, and then when the Board of Trustees needed to get Father Hesburgh to put some potential successors in place, Father Bill Beauchamp, Father Dave Tyson, and I were the three candidates. We were good friends all the way through the process. They both became presidents later at the University of Portland, and proving that you can fool some of the people all the time, I was chosen. I was president for 18 years. I've been to 90 countries. I've written 12 books. I've interacted with 23 heads of state. I've been on 32 boards, panels, and so on. So I've done a lot of different things, but Notre Dame was the focus of what I was about. I saw myself as a Holy Cross priest representing the history of the place. Notre Dame is going to next week inaugurate its fourth president in the last 73 years. So there's no school that's had so much continuity. I'll leave it to historians to decide whether it was good or not, since I'm one of them. But all I can say is, all things being equal, I love being the president. There were moments that were less than sheer bliss. I can talk about them if you want me to. And I learned a lot about dealing with people, representing a university, dealing with crises of one kind or another, and trying to keep our Catholic identity in the center of everything that we did. So that's my brief summary.
Monk, thank you. So you, from your upbringing, very diverse area that you talked about, socioeconomically, racially, ethnically, religiously, and then your experiences that you had through Notre Dame, and then, of course, in Nashville, which I didn't know about during that time there. You've met lots of people, right? And you talked about heads of states, you've met popes, but you've also seen the face of poverty up close.
I've been in some of the poorest places in the world. And I'll give you one example. Holy Cross is involved in Kenya, and there's a neighborhood in Nairobi that has 2 million people. It's considered one of the poorest places in the world. And Notre Dame had a couple of people that put together this seeding project for women that lived there so that they could start a business to help support their families. And so the woman who oversaw that, we walked through that whole neighborhood, which most people would think of as one of the dangerous places in the world. And everybody was friendly, and we were totally inspired by the example of what these women were doing with the money they had. And we were building off what they did to kind of increase the number of people involved. A second one was in Rio de Janeiro. One of our vice presidents at Notre Dame, Lunani, his wife's sister is a award-winning filmmaker, a Brazilian filmmaker. And we were there, I was there with 5 or 6 Notre Dame administrators. And we were toward the end of our time. And she said, I'd like to take you to this building in the middle of a favela, which is a word for the slum. And it was considered one of the more dangerous places in the world because they have shootouts almost every night between the police and the army and the people who live there. So we go there, and I said, geez, we're going to the airport, we get all our bags. So they took us to the building, and 2 people stayed with the drivers of the 2 vans. And then the kids took us all around the neighborhood, and everybody was waving at us and eventually we saw presentations of musical kind and drama and filmmaking. And the top place you could look out over the beaches and the nice part of the city. And we went back to the vans, got our bags, went to the airport, and took off. It was only later I found out that the chief drug czar in the neighborhood had put the word out that if anybody did anything to us, they'd be dead the next day. So I said, well, okay, we made it out, but we might not have if we'd gone in there on our own. Anyway, those are two stories about two of the poorer places I've been.
And so with those experiences and with the title of your book, you said people first. And in the first chapter, and I'll read that quote for us, those of us that maybe have not had a chance to read it yet. You said in the first chapter that leadership is, I got it right here. In my eyes, leadership is ultimately about people, people, people. Your focus has always been about people. And so talk a little bit about that. As I mentioned, there's all sorts of leadership theories, but you broke it down pretty simplistically that it really is about people.
You know, there's a famous business leader, will remain nameless, who saw the role that he had was to get rid of 10% of the people every year. That's how they're going to keep a lively corporate culture. I thought that was horrible when I heard that. Now, maybe there was 10% deserved to go, but just to set that out as a theoretical approach to the people that work for you, I thought was not what leadership is about. I think our job as leaders, and this is at any level, is to hire well and to prepare the people you hire, to get them to work together in a cooperative fashion, to articulate what the goals of the operation are, in my case, the university, then to evaluate them fairly, to reward them proportionately, and then when somebody finishes their term of service, to celebrate that as a model for others. So farewell parties, retirement parties, I think they're very important. But connected to all that is to thank people for everything, good thing they do, and to celebrate that insofar as you can. So I write a lot, to this day, I write a lot of congratulatory letters or emails, as well as thanks, because I don't think you can ever do enough of that. And I think if people in the end appreciate it, and hopefully it becomes characteristic of the operation. The same thing is true. How can you be a religiously affiliated institution and not allow people to celebrate the important moments in their lives? The birth of a child, sickness of some kind, the death in a family, an anniversary celebration. I mean, you just have to have flexibility in the way that work is constructed. And, obviously people can take advantage of that on occasion, but it's one of the ways of keeping the human dimension of what you're doing as a leader. The last thing I'll say is I was so fortunate in my time at Notre Dame to have such talented people in the core leadership group. A number of them have gone on to become university or college presidents, and others could have if they had chosen that direction. And I always encourage people that worked under me and the ones that work at Notre Dame now to keep open, keep thinking about what would you like to do with the rest of your life. So you never grow complacent or you feel like you're stuck in a rut. Always think what the possibilities are for the future. It could be internal, or it could be some people, in order to realize those goals, have to go elsewhere.
Thank you. I think it's chapter 3, you use the term virtuous leader. Now, that phrase is one that we use here at Holy Cross quite a bit. We have a core 4 set of principles or values that we aspire to teach through the lens of to form Catholic intellectual scholars, courageous citizens, virtuous leaders, and hopeful and passionate disciples. You tell us what's your meaning? What do you mean when you say virtuous leader?
Well, most of the theoretical perspective about virtue is the mean between two extremes. It recognizes that we're creatures of habit. So virtues and vices are all habits, and some obviously are toward the good and some are toward the bad. I think let's one of the things I like to play on is pale gas. You know what pale gas is? It's a mnemonic device for the 7 deadly sins: pale gas, pride, anger, lust, envy, avarice, gluttony, avarice, and sloth. And in the book, one of the things I do, this is the negative side, but I try and show why those things emerge from certain human tendencies that go awry, and that if they're connected to leadership, it allows some leaders to take full advantage of those they're supposedly serving. Then I try to analyze what kind of virtue. So classically, you have the corporal works of mercy, where you try to help. You have an obligation to provide for the basic necessities of life. Now that can apply internally, or try to mobilize people internally to serve externally. One of the things I was involved in as president of Notre Dame was the starting up of the South Bend Center for the Homeless. Dave Link and Darcy Chisholm were 2 Notre Dame administrators. They came to me in my first year as president, said we'd like to borrow $1 million. I said, well, that's not right. Where do you think I'm going to give $1 million? He said, well, I'd like you to go to the trustees and borrow $1 million. We'll pay it back eventually, but we can buy this clothing store in South Michigan. And we think that the need is so great here that we need to be able to have a center that's appropriate to the level of the problem. And so Notre Dame as an institution got heavily involved in that, but we didn't want to be the only one. So the city of South Bend and a number of not-for-profit organizations went along with us. And then through the years, I think we've been able to create there a model for the nation for a city our size. I think one of the good things about this community, South Bend, Mishawaka, and the area around us, is that none of the problems we have are so overwhelming in size and scale. And so this is a good example of that. There was already a pre-existing, religiously founded homeless shelter. But now that the South Bend Center for the Homeless has been there a long time, the city of South Bend has been trying to do things that some of the other not-for-profit groups. And although we never solved the problem, we've still been able to make, I think, real progress. So that would be, I think, an example. The life of virtue calls us to live a certain lifestyle, to try to model what the Christian believer ought to aspire to, but never to do it only for our own sake, but to do it as a preparation for making a much better contribution to the broader world and society.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've admired about your leadership is that you didn't just contain it to the University of Notre Dame. It was the Center for the Homeless. It's your involvement with the United Religious Communities. It's your involvement with hospice, with the other social sector, nonprofit, charitable communities here in South Bend. And I think I scratch my head a little bit and say, well, where do you find the time? But I appreciate what you've said is that you've used your platform. There was a platform there where you really could be a driver as a force for good to make a difference in the community. And so thank you. Thank you for that.
Let me comment on one thing. You said one of the virtues, or one of the characteristics of Holy Cross was piety. Now, I think I'm pious enough, I hope. But what I don't like about some of the contemporary rhetoric is that piety seems to be presented as a sign of self-justifying attitude. I think just like love and justice belong together, and prayer and service belong together, I think piety alone, except for those who are called to maybe the severe forms of the monastic life, I think the people that we're preparing here at Holy Cross, at Notre Dame and St. Mary's, we're preparing people to live in the world. And I think that's just critical, that they find a form of faith expression that's proportionate to the role that they'll play in the broader society. So anyway, I think that's an old debate. It's like, what's the relationship between love and justice? I think we need both. And if you look at the parable about the judgment at the end of time, which is the biblical foundation for the corporal works of mercy, but we also have the spiritual works of mercy. I mean, so all of those are important in their own right. But I think one of the things that happened at Vatican II was to do an analysis of the world around us, what its needs are, and then mobilized as Christian believers to try to make a difference. None of them, in my judgment, are so overwhelming that we can't do our part. It may be small, it may never be noticed by the broader society, but it's still important. On the other hand, I think piety and sacramental life is a necessary thing, because otherwise we simply get overwhelmed by how many, like I was just watching what was happening at that high school in Georgia. What can we learn from that terrible shooting event by a 14-year-old? Why did his father give him a AK, whatever, a gun as a present? Now his father's being charged as well. There were warnings. But one of the things I found out they did in that school is they gave teachers and maybe students too a button that they could lock all the doors if something bad happened. And they did. And they really saved some other people from being hurt. So those are the kind of things. Learn from the experience, get involved, and hopefully nothing like that will ever happen around us. But we should make sure that we're paying attention to what the best knowledge is at a given moment.
Monk, thank you. As students sitting in the audience here who might say, okay, well, gosh, you're Father Edward Monk Malloy, you were president at Notre Dame for 18 years. Dr. Clark, you have the role of president. I may not have a title, may not have a role necessarily that looks like leadership, but I think we can all, we're all called to leadership, and I think we all lead those around us. Could you tell us a little bit more for them as 18, 19, 20-year-olds that may not necessarily see themselves as leader? What can leadership look like for them?
There's an old debate are we born leaders or do we become leaders? I think there's probably a little bit of both. When I was a star athlete in high school, one of the priests there said, "You ought to run for student body president." I had never thought about running for student body president. He said to me, "I think you have the requisite qualities, and I think you'll be paid attention to by the other students because you have a certain high recognition." And I ran and I won, and I learned a lot. I also was a co-editor of the student newspaper and the yearbook, and that got me a chance to write. But my column in the student newspaper was about student life and about how we could do it better. So that was another. I used the writing mechanism as a way of trying to improve life overall. I think just taking the risk, get involved in something, can be very simple, and then build on that. There are things that you can do automatically that are set up ahead of time, and then you discover, people are not paying attention to that other area. One of the interesting things about student life, there's always people that are on the periphery of things. It's like the old question about how much bullying goes on in grade schools and high school. You can say, who's left out? Are they written off because they don't look right or don't have the right personality or whatever? They come from the wrong background? When somebody takes the leadership to welcome somebody who lives on the periphery of the school, they remember that the rest of their life. And that's a great model for other people to do the same thing. And so we brag about building community in our institution. And one of the tests of that, in terms of leadership, is take the initiative. Make somebody else feel like they belong. And try to, at least insofar as you can, form a relationship with them. Because that can make a big difference in your life, but also in their life. I've just taken out 21 of the 40 freshmen that live in my dorm for dinner. And I do this every year. I warn them that I do this. So my goal is to get as many of them as I can. And it's unbelievable what happens. When you bring like 8 students together and have them just chat with each other and ask them a couple of lead questions. And all of a sudden, you can just see relationships forming. Now, you don't have to take everybody out to dinner. Just go wherever you eat and share something or whatever. I just think there's a lot of ways that you can be a leader without being a big organizational type. And then, of course, every group needs people to take the minutes. Whoever takes the minutes is the collective memory of the whole organization, and those who set the agenda and all that stuff. So, and so in families, my guess is that husbands and wives divide the task in some way like that, and they become leaders each in their own realm. So I think there's plenty of opportunities for that. Could I tell you a couple of stories? I want to tell you a couple of stories because usually when I give talks, I begin with a little humor. So here's the limitations when you're a leader about how much sway you can have. So you have bookstore basketball. You don't know what bookstore basketball is? So I played bookstore basketball because I was a former basketball player myself for years. And I had different names, but in my presidential years, my team was called All the President's Men, which was a book and movie at the time. And I had three nieces, but my youngest niece, who works for the university now, her team was called All the President's Women. So I arranged for the two teams to play against each other as an opening game. I got together with the leadership. And so I thought this would be really good. As president, I can make people feel like we're out there playing with the kids and whatever, but just is. So the first play of the game, I grabbed my niece's shirt. They were terrible, by the way. I grabbed my niece's shirt. It was on the front page of the Observer, and it was on the Evening News. It never mentioned that I was related to her. But that's what happens. Sometimes it just goes in a certain direction, unexpected. Another story, there was a brother who was the head of the bookstore, and we used to kid him at Corby Hall that he was, but there was going to be a sale at the bookstore. And he used to say, there will be a sale at the bookstore over my dead body. His name was Conan Moran. So it turned out that as president, I celebrated his funeral and preached at his funeral. And I mentioned this. And I declared a sale at the bookstore over his dead body. One time I took a group of my students at the end of the year out for dinner. And one of my students, I wasn't dressed up or anything, one of my students on the way back said, I have some pain. Could you take me to the student health center? So I took him to the student health center, her. There was nobody there. It was a Sunday night. There was nobody there but the two of us and this woman at the desk. So she calls the nurse and they go away. So it's just this woman and me. So to make a conversation, she says, you work here? I said, yeah, I work here. So pause. You teach? I said, yeah, I teach. How much do you teach? I said, I teach one class a semester. Kind of a light load, isn't it? You do anything else? I said, yeah, I'm in the administration. She said, what do you do? I said, well, I'm the president of the university. So she's a little flabbergasted. And the next day I get a call from the head of the student health center, and she was apologizing that this woman didn't know who I was. I said, no, it's no big deal. But then I found out that she took a picture of all the top administrators and put them on all the desks. And so every time I went back to the health center, they were all waving at me as I come in and give me a big greeting. Anyway, just reminders along the way that your power is not as significant as you think it is. So.
Yeah. It's also a reminder along the way of the value of humor. All right, thank you for sharing that. And leadership, how we need to make sure that we continue to laugh. You had to make a lot of big decisions, I'm sure, some that you're very proud of, others maybe you second guess. But you used a phrase in your book, you referred to principled decision making. So for the benefit of the audience, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the opposite would be unprincipled decision making, which I don't think most people are in favor of. I think you have to determine what your leadership entails, that there are certain values that you're representing and that you want to defend, and that there are certain initiatives that you can take and things that you can respond to appropriately that come out of the blue. And so the two biggest memories of mine during my 18 years as president, one was the women's swim team accident, which happened 20 miles west of South Bend. 2 dead, 18 wounded or injured, one perhaps paralyzed for life. And I was in D.C. when it happened. I came back and I happened to be in the same plane with the head of security. A police car came out, took us out to the interstate, and it was, the bus was lying on its side. The luggage was scattered everywhere, and we could see what kind of an impact it had when it crashed. We went to the health center. Some of the parents were already arriving. So my first principled move was to try to console and to indicate we do everything we could to support the families. And that was taken for granted, but it's something we needed to reinforce. And then I went over to Memorial Hospital, where Haley Scott DeMaria, was lying there paralyzed. And I talked to her parents. They said if she can move a toe or a finger, it will give some indication that maybe with surgery she can get back to moving again. But their hopes were rather slim. I went in and prayed with her. Turned out she was not a Catholic, but that was no big deal. Later she became a Catholic. And after horrible surgery through the years, she came back, swam again. I was there, as were many others. Later on, she became our commencement speaker. She's now a professional inspirational speaker. She wrote a book about her time, which I use in my class on biography and autobiography. She comes for that discussion. Her eldest son just graduated. So which was an appropriate level of response by everybody at Notre Dame, not just me, turned into a great victory story. But I never would have imagined that when I thought our role was going to be to console. And the role ended up being to help capture the inspirational example we had from this wonderful young person. The other was 9/11. I don't need to, so for those, I know some of you are too young to have experienced 9/11, but I think for those of a certain generation, all of us remember where we were, what we were doing. And for me, we watched everything on TV and watched the reruns and the loops and all that. And then we tried to assess what had gone on. And we were afraid about how many people Notre Dame connected might be injured or dead. And so the big thing for me as a principal was to mobilize the whole of Notre Dame. And we did that, and we organized a mass on the South Quad for 10,000 people, which it turned out to be, and a choir of about 200 people, all in the spur of the moment. And what I have found, and I know it's true here and it's true at St. Mary's, is that in our worst times, we're the best, because we presume that comforting the sick and those who are and grieving the dying is one of the highest priorities that we can all have, individually and collectively. And celebrating the loss of a student or a parent has to have a high priority for all of us. And I think now other schools try to do it, and it's interesting to me to watch what goes on when they have a disaster at another school. They don't know quite how to do it. They have flowers, they have some kind of indication on the lawn or something, but they don't know what to do with the prayer part. And I think that's one of our great strengths, that we can pray in the midst of disaster, tragedy, sickness, and death, and that in the memory of those who were around at the time is what characterizes their experience of the institution, and hopefully they carry it with them wherever they go.
Beautiful. Monk, in your 18 years as president at Notre Dame, this will be my last question, and then I'm going to queue up everybody for questions from the audience. In your 18 years at the University of Notre Dame, you can look back on many, many successes. You helped to raise the endowment, hundreds of millions of dollars. There's new buildings on that campus, new programs, institutes and centers, outreach to the local community and internationally. The founding of the University of Notre Dame Australia, which I know you were a significant driver behind that. But is there one thing as you look back on your 18 years that you are most gratified by, most proud of?
It's so funny how often I've been asked that question, and I have the same answer over and over again. I was most proud that we did many things simultaneously. I'll just give you a brief list. We focused on the quality of teaching at all levels. We enhanced significantly our professional and graduate schools and research. We were much more diverse in our composition, much more international in our focus, that we were a better participant in the town-gown relationship, that we were successful in fundraising, that we enhanced our endowment as a result of that, especially with financial aid, and that we were faithful to our Catholic mission and identity, and that we gave appropriate levels of appropriateness to the role of Holy Cross within the institution. Now, I don't claim success or responsibility for all of that, but I think if I look back on that 18-year span of time, and I would say the same thing about Father Jacob, 19 years. I think he did many of the same things, but different things. Let me say about him, he kept us open during COVID, which a lot of schools of our kind closed. The Crossroads project around the football stadium, he was much criticized for that before it was done, but I think it's been a huge success. And I could list many other things, but I think collectively, Ted and me and John and now Bob Dowd, I think will be a great president, and we've been able to build on each other and to do it in our own distinctive way. I'm a theologian. John is a philosopher. Bob is a political scientist. Bob has a lot of experience in East Africa. He's an Africanist by specialization in political science. So that's going to inform some of the decisions that he makes as president. But we've had from the time I started to the time I finished, no one was in the administration during that whole time. So you could say you get stagnant if you have the same leader for 18 years, but for 19 years. But if you have different people playing all the other roles, then you have new ideas, new experiences coming to the fore.
So I think one of the greatest legacies from my observation is are the other young leaders who, under your mentorship and tutelage, have emerged as top leaders today at the university. You mentioned one of them, Lou Nani, who of course was involved with the Center for the Homeless before now serving in the vice president role in college relations. Shannon Cullinan, who's the executive vice president. The importance of succession planning, of building up, celebrating people. I just really tip my hat to you for that, because that's legacy. That's how it continues, and focused on mission and focused on your identity.
Well, the word that people use about that is mentorship. I think I felt an obligation to mentor a bunch of different people, and more often than not, it's worked, not all the time, but it's worked, I think, to the benefit of the institution, of multiple institutions. And I think you have that obligation. Bob Dowd has that obligation. And all of the people that play in these roles, Katie Conboy has that obligation. I mean, I think all of these presidents here need to look to the future. You hate to say it this way, if you die tomorrow, who's going to carry the load? I mean, you need to have within you, you don't have this expansive an institution as I had a leadership role in, but still within that, you can say, well, I identify as this person, but it gives them a certain level of responsibility, and hopefully it'll all work to the benefit of the institution in the long run.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's open the floor, see if there's some questions from the floor. Liam, I think we've got a microphone that's going to float around, but Liam, you're right here. If you would stand, just be nice and loud.
Hi, Father Malloy, thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate it. My name is Liam Pearl, and I'm a senior at Holy Cross. And I was curious about on a micro and then macro level of attributes of a Holy Cross leader. What, in your experience, has been one of the most difficult attributes of the 7 that we discussed here to uphold? And then is there a particular time where, whether it be that attribute or another, has been difficult to uphold in a conflict?
But as I said in the introduction to the book, people. A lot of things about people, in terms of the positive directory of putting the team together and all that, the hardest things I ever had to do all were people-oriented. I mentioned that person who was in a leadership role for a big company that fired 10% every year. I hated firing people. I fired people. I mean, if you do it for cause, that is, they did something really bad, that's one thing. But if you do it just because they're not as good as they could have been, the institution needs better leadership in a certain area. I think that's hard to do, but it needs to be done in a proper fashion. And that means respecting the dignity of people, trying to provide alternative steps so that they can, if they're not staying at the institution, find another job somewhere else, and try to make sure that their financial situation lasts for enough time that they can restart somewhere else. So I think those are very hard to do. Not everybody feels comfortable in making those kinds of decisions. But in the end, if the institution doesn't, if you don't have the courage to do things you need to do, then the institution's going to suffer. So I don't know which one of the sevens that applies to. I have to look at them again. But I think for some people, finding the right balance between proper high level of evaluation, expecting excellence, and then some people are not going to rise to that level, and then how to deal with them in a respectful fashion. That's a very difficult thing to pull off. But I never enjoyed it. That is, if it's a negative side. I always enjoyed celebrating the good things and the promotions and stuff like that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions that we have? Yep. Let's go. Yeah, Eli, go ahead. Yep. Nice and loud, please.
Howdy, Father. Howdy, Dr. Clark. My name's Eli Gay. I'm a senior this year at Holy Cross. And I guess my main question kind of competes with Liam's, but I guess in a more student-oriented context, but I'm talking to this now. What's the main, I guess, aspect of leadership that we can apply as students either right now, be that just on campus with different organizations such as like student government or residence life and such, or even for seniors who are hoping to join the workforce and apply themselves in like a real life, I guess now?
I think leadership is like every other positive aspect in someone's life. The more you do it and the higher levels of responsibility that you take on, all things being equal, the better you will be, better at it you will be, especially if you have the capacity for reflection. I think leaders do need mentors. You do need both examples and people you can converse with. How am I doing? A good example would be public speaking. You don't have to be a gifted public speaker to be a leader, but people that start out not being comfortable or not being very good at it need some instruction about how to improve what they're doing. And the same thing could be true running a meeting. If I would say one of my attributes is my meetings start on time and they end on time. And if you don't like that, too bad, but that's what's going to happen. And I get driven nuts if meetings start late and end late, because there's always something else you want to be doing. And I mean, it's just a sign that the person that, tell me when it's, I don't know if I say this as a kind of stereotypical thing. I make a lot of trips to Latin America. In Latin America, culturally, when people say something like dinner starts at 5, they really mean 6 for 6:30. You get there at 5, they're looking at you like, what are you doing here? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. One's not better than the other. But we're used to, people say the dinner starts at this time. That's in the United States, that's pretty much when you ought to be there. Or in fact, you ought to be there a little bit early. So I think you have to be savvy about when it comes to kind of cultural expectations. But all things being equal, leadership entails those kinds. Give the right kind of information ahead of time, start on time, get ready. Or it could be, you don't want to start on time, you start 5 minutes late. That's the appropriate thing, 5 minutes late. It's just you have to decide those kinds of, what seem like trivial things, in the end are not that trivial, especially if it's a part of the everyday life of the institution. But the more leadership roles that you play now or in the future, the better prepared you're going to be if somebody says, we'd like you to take this job, and you're going to be overseeing 50 people or 100 people or whatever.
And I might add, it looks like we've got a question here too. The competence to see, courage to act, I think just applies so much to any position we have in life. Like you see, there's a problem here. There's something that could be done better. There's something that I think I can help make better, right? That's all the competence to see. And then it's the courage to act. And so I would challenge you as leaders here on this campus, I think just as our SGA has done, they've said, you know what, we want to enhance student life. And there was a group of guys that live on Basel. They said, hey, we want to create a whole new culture for student life, and we're going to start with our floor in Basel. And we're going to rearrange the social lounge, and we're going to bring some food in, and we're going to add some new programs. You know what, to me, that's leadership, right? You recognize a need, competence to see, you take the courage to act, and you act on it, right, for the greater good.
Then you hope somebody shows up.
And then you hope somebody shows up. So that's right. Yeah, this is a little, we rolled the dice a little bit with this class, but I think we got a great turnout, and it helps that we have such a great first speaker. It looks like Tori has a question.
Hi, so I'm Tori Pisco. I'm a sophomore here at Holy Cross, and you were talking a lot about how you mentored people, and I was just curious who mentored you.
Good question. In my book, I talk about, I have a whole section about mentorship. I would say Father Ted Hesburgh, my predecessor, was a great mentor for me, both because in the interval between when the Board of Trustees said, get some other people involved in the administration as potential successors, he did it. And I became a vice president and associate provost, the number 2 academic officer. But myself and Bill Beauchamp and Dave Tyson were all invited to everything. We went to the trustee meetings. We went to the advisory council meetings. We went to the alumni board meetings. We went out on the road and did events. And we would social events of various kinds. So through the course of several years, I watched how Ted dealt with all those things. And he was a very effective public speaker. He loved traveling. He was then another great mentor for me was Don Keogh. He was the chair of the Board of Trustees, number 2 at Coke. Let me demonstrate something. He would grab you like this and put his arm around, and he would do that to the whole room, and everybody thought by the end he was their best friend because he just had this tactile way of meeting people, and he just did it naturally, and people just went, well, that was really nice. He hugged me pretty much, even though we just met. Anyway, that would be an example. You just watch how people deal with different kind of situations. One of the things that we were instructed to do was we brought in a woman who was the former national correspondent for one of the big television channels, stations, and she gave an instruction about television. What do you need to know about television? And for example, the most important part of the face is the eyebrows, in her judgment. And she said to me one time, it'd be better if you didn't have to wear black and white. How about red? I said, well, that's not my rank, really. That can't be good. Anyway, it's the same thing with pictures. I think mentorship is really important, but Ted and Don Keogh, I would identify. And then Lou Nani was somebody I mentored directly. And then John Affleck Graves, who used to be our executive VP, he mentored Shannon Cullinan, who's now our executive VP. And they, in turn, have mentored many other people in the Notre Dame administration. So it's like once it gets started, then it's kind of expected. And nobody thinks, well, you're moving me around. Why are you doing that? It's because you're trying to prepare me for the future.
So one of the big takeaways is that obligation for people in leadership roles to mentor, to lead others, right? To identify and help elevate others throughout their own career path.
Let me talk about one other thing. People wonder about whether it's dangerous to be a leader today. I mentioned the high school in Georgia, but unfortunately in this country, we've had so many cases. I had somebody come to my office many years ago with a knife and a gun and the makings of a bomb in his car. And my assistant at the time recognized there was something wrong. And so she sent him to the men's room and called security, and they came over and tackled the guy, put a handcuff on him, and took him away. Now, fortunately, nothing worse happened. We put this gigantic security guard outside our offices for a while, and we put panic buttons in the various desks. I then went to a national meeting of college and university presidents, and the guy from Texas said, "That's nothing." He said, "I had a guy come into my office with a .45 and shoot into the ceiling. So he said, "I wear a bulletproof vest, and my family members have full-time security guards." And then the one from Berkeley, California said, "We had somebody come in and burglarize our house. We called security and had a shootout. They killed the 2 burglars." Now, those are extreme events. They happen extremely rarely. But it's just a reminder, as we're finding out, if there's a lot of guns around, some people are going to misuse them. And so you need to be prepared. And that's why I asked my students, have all of you done live shooter drill? And they all have done it, no matter where they went to school, because that's just part of the American culture today. So I don't think these jobs are particularly dangerous. We have very safe campuses here, all things being equal, but you don't want to be overconfident either. You need to be able to take the right steps if a bad thing happens. And I think that's, I mentioned from that high school, they now have a clicker system that closes doors. And that's one of the ways of trying to prevent greater harm.
I think we've got time for at least one more question in the back left. Yep, my left.
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm a sophomore at Holy Cross, and you've been speaking about mentorship a lot. And I was curious as to how I could gain or even foster mentorship relationships from someone at a younger age.
Well, it helps if they want to be mentored, but you could take the initiative. You can identify someone or some group and say, "I've learned a lot in my time at Holy Cross, and we're taking this class on leadership, and I'd love to talk to you about your potential for leadership." I think that's a good way to start it. And what are they going to say? They're all going to say is, "No, I don't like you," or "I don't think you'd be a good mentor," or something. But I think a lot of people would be very happy that somebody took the initiative on their behalf. And that's a good way to begin. And do you have members in your immediate family? Do you have any siblings?
I do. I can have both.
There, right there. You may not like it, but listen to me, I'm your older brother. Yeah, but anyway, I think here at the college, just trying to identify people that you think have the potential and say, "Let's talk." You can use this class as an excuse. I'm learning things in this class. How would you like to talk a little bit about leadership? Gotta go from there.
That's terrific. And Luke, are you looking as well? I think part of the question is about looking for a mentor, right? Identifying somebody who can mentor you. Is that right?
I thought you wanted to go the other way.
Both. Both gaining a relationship, but also holding that. You know?
Yeah, no. Okay, but obviously it goes both ways.
Yeah. Especially because someone younger, you don't have any leverage. You know, I'm not providing anything.
You have more leverage than you imagine.
Oh, I agree.
Because you're older and because you're more experienced. Yeah.
I have a good friend of mine, Chip Connolly, who says, "We old people need mentoring from you because you know more things than we ever will know." So yes, we need to be mentored by you.
There we go. I love it.
Who takes pictures? If you have a bunch of people around, they want somebody to say, "Well, we take a picture of our family." Go for a 12-year-old. Or that's my. Don't go for old people. They don't know what they're doing. Go for a young person.
I think we've got one more question in the front here. Looks like, we got a few more minutes left. So why don't we take one more question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to know, are there any kind of watershed moments of realization where you learn something really important about leadership over your many, many years of leadership experience?
We had our first major NCAA penalty. We self-reported a woman stole a bunch of money from the company that she worked for, and she had paid $25 to belong to some booster club at Notre Dame. That was her only relation. Never went to Notre Dame. That was her only relationship to the school. She used that money to entertain various Notre Dame athletes. When the NCAA, what has to be self-reported, found that out, they gave us this penalty. I thought myself that it was too severe for what actually happened. But we prepared, and I did in over 3.5 hours, in 50-minute segments, I had to explain how we were going to respond to this and what we were planning to do to make sure it never happened again. I did that. I didn't try and say it shouldn't have been a minor instead of a major. I didn't go that direction at all. I said, we're embarrassed. This is not the way we want to do things. We're going to get rid of that club. We're going to evaluate every aspect of how we deal with things within athletics. And we're going to do that in such a public fashion that everybody will know about it. After that first question, they didn't know what to ask. And never again in a public forum has anybody ever asked me about that event, which suggests to me that even when you have bad news that you're unhappy about, if you deal with the media the right way, you can get beyond it, and then people will allow that change to take place. If you live to my age and you look back, and I can remember things even during my time as president, where people were so incensed or totally convinced about this is the most important thing going on. Nobody remembers that. I mean, if you live long enough, no, I'm not saying that's true of all things, but it's comforting to know that you can get past moments of challenge and difficulty, and even things that look like that suggest that there was a corruption within your operation. So that was a turning point for me to find, and I was the only one representing the institution. And I found by the end, they accepted what I had to say and had no other questions to ask. And since then, as I said, nobody's ever asked me that again. That's a very good question.
Yeah, excellent question. Well, can we give a big round of applause to Father Reverend Monk Malloy? Thank you. Thank you. So I know that some of you have a book, and Monk, if you're able to stick around and take a picture or so with people, we're going to have a reception right outside in the atrium. We'll have a reception, so all are welcome to join us. Students who are getting credit for this, next Friday, please, 1-page to 3-page reflection on today. Again, I'll send that out through Moodle anyway, so that you've got those instructions. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll have Iris Hamill as our next speaker. Iris is an entrepreneurship leader. Some of you know her, are involved in her programs. She's a local presence here in South Bend, just really doing extraordinary work with business startups. But she's going to talk about this entrepreneurial magnanimity, all right, what that really looks like, and what it takes to have an entrepreneurship mindset. So, folks, thanks and welcome. What a great start to this new series. We're glad to have you with us. And let's continue to be saints today and saints for all eternity. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.